Hey guys, this is Tim with Tabletop Terrors. You've probably noticed that there haven't been any videos in the last couple of weeks, and that is because we've been upgrading. We've been upgrading the blog, we've been upgrading the camera, the lighting, and so the videos that we're really going to try to up the quality overall. One of the things we're going to do to up the quality is to bring in a new viewpoint, which brings me to my brother James. He actually is the one who programmed the entire blog, and he's going to be joining me on the videos from now on.
Hey guys, Tim and I talk about D&D a lot, so I thought it'd be really cool to have multiple viewpoints, and it gives us a chance to hang out and do what we do all the time anyway, talk about D&D for you guys, and maybe you'll be interested in some of our opinions.
Absolutely. So for today, one of the things we're going to talk about is archetypes versus stereotypes. So without further ado, here we go. All right, so what we're going to talk about today applies equally to players and dungeon masters, just in slightly different ways. The first thing I want to talk about is what an archetype is. An archetype is the perfect example of something. So if you wanted to show somebody a wizard, a great archetype to show them would be Gandalf. He's got a beard, he's got a staff, he's got a robe. Maybe Drizzt, as far as showing somebody what a drow would be like. And that is the perfect quintessential example, the pinnacle of that thing. This can be helpful as a player. If you're a new player, you can actually, start to model your character after an archetype. Or if you're a dungeon master, you can actually model some of your NPCs after archetypes. The danger lies in those archetypes becoming stereotypes.
Now, a stereotype is unfairly assigning characteristics to things that may often have those characteristics. A good example would be if one of your players creates a wizard. There's no reason he has to have a beard or carry a staff or have robes. He could be a little younger, or he could be a battle mage or wear armor. Especially in 5th edition, they allow you to do whatever you want, so it's important not to lean too much on archetypes because they quickly become flat and meaningless when they're stereotypes.
Okay, so that's the difference between archetypes and stereotypes. But there's one more thing we want to kind of draw a line and clearly define. It's tropes and cliches and the differences. And we're going somewhere with this, so stick with us. A trope is sort of a device or a convention that you can generally expect to be present in the player's minds. And that is whether you're a DM or an adventurer. Things like the kindly old innkeeper or the withered hag in the swamp. They're things that have been present, they've been around for a long time, and so using those, they create an immediate sense of familiarity. The danger is when those start to become cliches.
Now, some of those concepts become cliched when you overuse them. So if every innkeeper is kindly and every marsh the players come across a withered old hag, it gets a little bit old. It's good to sometimes turn those on their head and change it up, but it's important not to lean on them too much because it can get dangerous and start making your world a little less alive.
Yeah, and usually cliches are used in a lazy way, and a trope is used in a more understood and deliberate way. So now what we're going to talk about is how to use these things, both the archetype and the stereotype, the trope and the cliche, as adventurers and DMs to the most powerful effect. So here we go.
As a DM, archetypes can be very helpful for new players. It gives them context for what a wizard might be or what a rogue might be. Every single one doesn't have to be that, but when players are starting out, it's good for them to have somewhere to start so that everything isn't foreign to them.
Right, and so one of the things to remember is that, Gandalf is the almighty powerful wizard, and we know him as that. There are plenty others, but if your players never read Lord of the Rings, if they're new to the game, new to the table, it's important to establish that baseline. So it's an archetype that you can use to say, this is what a mighty powerful white wizard looks like. Again, the danger becomes when that turns into a cliche. That turns into a cliche when every wizard that new player runs into is a mighty, white-bearded, powerful wizard. So the next thing we want to talk about is not new players, but experienced players. How can we take these things and turn them on their ear purposefully to go to that second and third level of creativity and create something really fantastic? Okay, so how can you apply this to your game? How does this affect the table? Well, what I want you to do is I want you to think about your creativity, okay? And I think that people are a very particular kind of creative when they're problem solving. You know, you can even look at with like George Lucas with the original Star Wars films. Because the budget was lower, he had to think up things to fit what he already had. Sometimes that can create, just like I said, the creative juices are very different. They're very pungent. And so what I want to do is talk about this. If someone handed you a picture that clearly looked like a wizard, and I said, you know, come up with a character concept, the average person who's played a little bit of D&D would start making that character a wizard. Oh, okay, yeah, well, let me think. What school would I have go to? You know, my magic and things like that. What I'm wanting to do is I'm going to hand you a picture of a wizard, quote unquote, and I want you to think, why is this wizard a fighter? So now you're not looking at the wizard staff and thinking, well, okay, what's my arcane focus? Or thinking, you know, why am I wearing these robes? Now you're thinking, okay, this is a fighter. And I don't mean an eldritch knight. I mean a fighter. Does he obfuscate opponents with his robe? Is that, you know, staff? Is that actually a bow? Is it hiding a sword in it? That's what I'm talking about. Take this archetype, this wizard archetype, and then dissect it and flip it over on purpose and make it a fighter. So that's what we're actually going to do next. We're going to make a fighter a wizard and a wizard a fighter to show you how you can tear these things apart and use them to the greatest effect. All right, so here's some practical application. We're going to take two characters, all right, just like we talked about. We're basically going to take a fighter type and then a wizard type, and we're going to flip-flop them and use that second and third level creativity, pushing past, trying to find reasons that they have the things that they have instead of just going with the stereotype or the archetype, etc.
It'll just be a good example of how you can do this. So the ones we'll be doing may not be, you know, you can make your fighter or your wizard whatever you want.
Sure,
but this is just a good example of really taking it to the max and just turning this thing completely around.
Exactly. We'd like to thank Gauntus for use of his art, and so we'll link him in the show notes. But starting out here, we're going to just show you the picture, and then we're going to work through this. So this is going to be a stream of consciousness, and we're going to talk through it. We have not planned this because we want it to be spontaneous and really show that creativity as it unfolds. So here we go.
So you see the mage here. She sort of has brown tunic on, but if you wanted, she could just have sort of flowing leather armor. So she's a fighter that she has a little bit less armor, but she relies heavily on her dexterity and moves around a lot.
I like that. I like that that's flowing leather armor and not necessarily a robe. I also like the idea, for instance, like when she's fighting, she can use the pieces of the robe to try to entangle and wrap up, you know, her enemy's weapons, things like that, which would also lend to acrobatics. You know, I'm thinking like cartwheels and things like that, very quick movements to where those would whip around and basically distract the enemy, block their weapons, and so on. So I love that idea of that being leather armor and not just a tunic. All right, so let's talk about our weapon here. This is what looks to be just like a wizard's staff. We even see what looks like, you know, the ether of electrical magic of some sort coming out of the top of it. What can we do here? I'm thinking, okay, and this is actually a great example of what I was calling first, second, and third level creativity. First level creativity, that's your stereotype, that's your trope. Second level creativity is the next idea. And then third level creativity is really pushing it and trying to go that extra step. So my first thought is, this could be a spear. That's second level creativity. That's not bad, but I want to push it one step further than that. So what can we do to try to make this a little more interesting? So it was a staff. We pushed it to being a spear, but I kind of want to go one step further. Is there something else that we can make this?
Yeah, I think maybe if it were a lightsaber. I couldn't help it. You were like led me into it.
That's funny. Okay, here's what I'm thinking. You see up at the top there how it looks like it's almost wrapped?
Yeah.
So what I'm thinking is, what if this acted like a whip?
Okay.
So what it is that it is still a weapon that's sort of magical, but what this thing does is the strands wrap up tightly, so it can be used secondarily as a spear. But the handle stays taut the way that it is, and when she uses it certain ways, that unravels and there's strands. And so it would kind of lend to that acrobatic kind of, you can trip, pull enemies, things like that. So how does something like that sound?
I think it's really cool, and it opens a lot of possibilities for interesting things that aren't just I move and I attack, I hit this thing with my sword or my staff, or it allows you in the same way with the robes, stopping enemies and doing a lot of things. She's not just killing everything and cutting everything down as a fighter. She's really a very tactical fighter instead of just really strong, heavily armored, cleave stuff in half.
Yeah, I like that. And it's going to make what was once just a wizard, which, I mean, she could make a really cool wizard. You can come up with a lot of really cool stuff. But it now takes that, and you have this acrobatic, spear whip using, leather-clad female fighter, and that takes it to an entirely different place. You're going beyond a stereotype, you're going beyond a trope. You're basically just coming up with something absolutely new.
All right, now, how about with this fighter? I mean, this guy's a fighter. He could really be any fighting class, but he's got really heavy armor on. He's got a really big sword. So how are we going to make this guy a mage? Or a wizard, a magic user?
Yeah, I specifically want to go wizard because we could say magic user, and then you could slide into Eldritch Knight, which I want to really pigeonhole this because I want it to be tough for us. So he almost looks obviously like a knight with no helmet, or it could definitely be paladin-y, but we're going to make this guy a wizard.
So what if what you see, this big heavy plate armor, is the way his mage armor manifests? He casts mage armor on himself, and that's what it looks like. I mean, your mage armor can look like whatever you want. It could look like full plate, especially to give enemies the wrong idea. If you see someone coming at you with full plate, you're going to be a little less likely to attack them. If you saw someone in robes, you'd probably try to cut them in half.
Right, and in fact, I'm kind of thinking it would be great, and this might kind of be a shortcut, but I'm going to go with it because it's what popped into my head. It would be interesting if this fine bearded gentleman is very adept at magic, but he's always wanted to be a fighter. So that sword you see there, it actually, what looks like the pommel, I'm not sure if that's a jewel or just a ring, that's his arcane focus, right? But he's attached it to this big heavy sword because he wants to walk around carrying a big heavy sword. He can't swing that thing to save his life.
Now, I really like the idea of his sword having his arcane focus on it and he can't really use it, and I think that'd be a really cool idea for a character. Now, how about if we take it a step further, and this enormous sword that this guy's carrying around is actually a summoned weapon. He used some sort of weapon summoning spell, and he uses it so he's able to make it look really big, but it's actually light and does a little less damage. But again, in the same vein, makes him look a lot more imposing than your normal wizard might look, walking up in robes, casting magic. A lot of people are going to go for them first. They're wearing robes. I mean, you shoot a bow at them and they're going down. Right. But you don't usually use your first crossbow bolt against the guy in plate armor with the enormous sword. It's just not good tactics.
Yeah, I agree. And in fact, I'm kind of going, if you want to go the roleplay route with this, I would even say, depending on his 5th edition background, you could even make it so that he takes a lot of ranks in bluff or performance. He wants people to think that he's a knight. He wants people to think that he's a fighter. So for instance, what an interesting concept that he's shooting his magic missile, but he's trying to make it look as though he has a magical sword. So as he's swinging the sword, the magic missile is coming out of, the pommel, say, but he's trying to make it look like he's striking his enemies with a blade. And so he's coming up with creative ways of making himself look like an Eldritch Knight, and the spell effects making him look more like a fighter and tougher than he is. So this is just one working example. Obviously, there are a million ways to do this. And so I want to address this towards DMs, something that you can applicably do immediately. In your game, the next time you're making an NPC, take something that you started with and go the exact opposite direction. If you were going to make, say, a cult, instead of making that cult robe-wearing, mask-having wizards, why not go with barbarians? Instead of it being a cult that is, all magic users, what if they're primal fighters and they use poisonous paint all over their bodies, and they're these, you know, hulking barbarians. They still are just as dangerous, and they still worship this foul deity, but now you have a lot of different things that you can use already at your disposal to make your creativity stir, since you didn't just go with your standard stereotype, cliche, or trope.
Now, and it's not just for DMs, the really cool thing about this topic is it applies to players as well. When you're creating your character, or when you level up and you want to really flesh out your character's story, you can also come up with things that are a lot more uncommon. You can take your fighter and say why they look like a mage, or take your wizard and say why they look like a fighter. In the game of D&D, because you can do anything, the stats are what matters when you're playing, but as far as the way you look and the way you talk and the things you do, there's such a wide berth of possibilities that you can take all these stereotypes and really change them around to make your character a lot more unique than every single wizard. As a wizard, you don't want to be going for what Gandalf was. I mean, maybe you do, but you can make your wizard so much more you and so much more memorable if they're not the same beard-having, staff-wielding, you know, white-robed wizard.
You know, to take that a step further, really, again, I want to remind everybody that you can do a stereotype and you can do a trope or an archetype, but now you're doing it on purpose. It's not because it's the first thing that popped in your head and that's the direction you went. It's because it's the direction you chose. And that will also make the game have more depth. So no matter how you choose to use this, we challenge you this week or in the coming month as you prep, whether you're an adventurer or a dungeon master, take something and go the exact opposite direction, and then use that creativity to find out reasons why this thing is different. I know you won't be disappointed.
Alright guys, so remember, like this video, subscribe if you haven't already, share it with your friends. You can also see us at tabletopterrors.com. We have some really cool content, some articles we write on there as well, and we have a podcast on Podbean. You'll find that on the website too.
Yeah, and again, special thanks to Gauntus for use of his art in this video. Until next time, I'm Tim, and this is James, and you're watching Tabletop Terrors. Thanks so much, guys.